It's timely, it's insightful, it's motivating, it's empowering. It's Time with Fred, your inspirational broadcast with host Fred Gaddy.
Good evening and a very warm welcome to another edition of Time with Fred. I trust that you're staying safe and well wherever you may be watching us from. Tonight I have the pleasure of interviewing a very special person to me and also to our nation. He is my brother-in-law. He is ex-military and he's also served in the Special Forces as well of the United States to talk to us this evening about fighting the invisible enemy. And we thought this was appropriate because of what we're dealing with in the world right now, fighting the invisible enemy in the form of COVID-19. It's one thing fighting an enemy that you see with your natural eye, but it's quite another fighting an enemy that you don't really see. And I think that even makes it more challenging. Kabi is going to be talking to us about his own personal experiences and what he dealt with his experiences in war and how he fought the invisible enemy, how he kept his mind safe in the midst of all he had to deal with. And I think it applies to us as well, right? It's important that we keep our mind safe, guard our mind, or keep a mindset that is intact. So I want to introduce Kobe and I want to welcome him again to Time with Fred. Kobe, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight, and also thank you for your service to us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Fred. It's awesome.
Great. So Kobe, you're going to have talked, and I'm approaching this not from a relational perspective, but from a very practical perspective, because you've shared some of your own personal stories, and I thought it would be great for you to come in tonight and share with us some of the strategies and how you have personally overcome the war with the mind. And I'm sure this goes without saying that we're all dealing with this global pandemic, right? It's an unknown thing. We don't have any idea. We can't see it, which makes it even more difficult to fight. We're safeguarding. We're wearing our masks. We're doing everything we can, washing our hands. We're fighting against an unknown enemy. Even at home, I sneeze in the kitchen. I'm like, hey, Dad, go wash your hands, cover your nose and all. So there is this heightened awareness, right, to make sure that we win this battle with the mind. So you shared a personal story that, Kobe, I want us to dwell on tonight about how you survived like a training or selection with a spec. Can you give us a little bit of background and why it's really important to protect this mind, or why it's important to be intentional about fighting this war in the mind?
Yeah, so again, thanks for having me. Just to go back a little bit, I moved over here in 2000, and I joined the Army, like you mentioned, and I was stationed in Fort Bragg in the regular Army in the 82nd to start off with. And at some point, I decided, become an American. So I was like, I need to do this to the best of my ability. So I joined. I went to see the recruiter for Special Forces. And he was like, hey, we need you to run a PT test. Come on back. And I was like, dude, I can run it right now. And I was in uniform and boots. He's like, all right, go ahead and do it. Knocked it out. He said, hey, come back. We'll give you a date. So I got a packet, started training. And most of the training involved just a lot of running, rocking, climbing ropes, because, it was a lot of rope climbing, maybe some time in the pool, but not as much, because I knew the water stuff wasn't as much. So up until then, what I knew about Special Forces was a place where, they tested you physically and mentally as well, because you go to Ranger School and get tested physically, but then you can go to Special Forces, get tested physically and mentally, because they wanted to see how well you would adapt under stress. So I figured it would be a good life challenge. It's one of those rites of passage that people generally want to go through. And when you're young, in your 20s, I mean, it's amazing. It sounds fun. So I signed up for it. Signed up for the October-November class, which is one of the last classes of the year. It's a little cold in North Carolina, but not too bad. And I went out there. And there were things that I had a challenging time with. I mean, it's a whole process. And without going into too much detail about the process and it changes from time to time. We went through the initial phase where it was like individual stakes, a lot of running, no watch. You just kind of push yourself. But mentally, the idea was if I had to run, I didn't know how far I had to run. Then I had to pace myself, but I didn't want to run too slow where I would fail the standard because nobody knows what the standard is. But that mental game came into play immediately, right? So the first day we got there was easy. It was like, okay, we'll go do a run. We did a PT test right away. And then after that, PT test, a physical fitness test just to see where you are. But they don't tell you how well you do. So nobody's cheerleading you on. You just do the best you can. Then we started doing these runs, doing the best that I could. And then there was a stake where it's called the Star Course. And when I went, it was a 3-day event. So you basically started walking around 11:30 at night, and you had to find 4 points. So you walked and you found your 4 points, you were done.
So was this when you were in the special forces, or was this when you were in the military?
This is still training, right? So you haven't even made it there. They just want to see if you're good enough to be there. So we started off with this. It's a Star Course. It's part of the selection process. The selection is just to say, okay, you're good enough. You can come through training now, right? We don't want to take somebody who's not good enough mentally. They're not capable. We want to have people who are mentally and physically able, and then we're going to give them more training. And then at the end of the day, maybe they become awesome and do good things for the country. So showing up, going through the selection process, you did you swam, and you did all that weekly, that first week. Then you got into this like navigation stage, and essentially you were going. The points were on average between 8 to 10 kilometers apart in a straight line distance, but you can't complete that if you just walk straight because it's like there's lakes and obstacles that you just basically can't walk straight. So you're gonna walk around and get to your point. So the first day I went out, I wasn't awesome at it. I got lost. So I spent all night walking though. I walked to a point, got lost, walked all the way back to my start point. Fortunately, I found it, started the whole thing again. And another first night, which ended, the first day ends, so 11:30 to the next day at noon. So at noon, I made it to the nearest road. Somebody picked me up, and they were like, hey, how many points did you find? I was like, 2. Like, man. All right, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to go back out there tomorrow. So we have a little break during the day. You sleep it off a little bit, and then again, 11:30 at night, you kick off again. So the second day I went out there, I found 3 points, but I didn't find 4, so I had to go the third day. And all this stuff was beginning to weigh on my body, So after running around, running through obstacles, we call it nasty Nick. After doing all this many hikes, buddy hikes, day and night stakes, and then now you're on this individual stake, and it's night to day, right? So 11:30 to the day. It just slowly starts grinding on you. But I was conditioned for it. I'd been training for several months, before I went out there. So I felt like, physically I could handle it. So even though it challenged me, and I remember saying with another guy called Isaiah, the only other black guy in my class that I was, there was like 5 black guys, but they kind of started failing off. I mean, not to make it a racist thing, but there was another one, naturally just gravitate towards people you have like interest with. So I'm sitting out there with him, and he's telling me how good he has, and where he came from, and his mind was wavering. And I was trying to talk to him, saying, "Man, but you would always regret it if you just don't stay out here and grind it out and like get hurt and go home. If you leave now, you would always regret it, So anyway, needless to say, I wasn't a good speaker like yourself, and I could not convince this guy to stay on. Next thing you know, he moved his stuff, went to the cadre, told him he was done, and then they sent him away. So now I'm by myself, and I'm like, I'm gonna go out the third night. And all I needed to do, if you don't find 4 points in a day, then all you have to do is find 8 points in a 3-day event. Obviously, they understand it's physically draining on you. So the odds of you finding the rest of your points on the last day is pretty low. But I went through there, and I was determined. I was almost at my physical limit, but I pushed through that, and I made it through that, found 8 points. That was good. So I made it. No big deal. I was gonna pass that stake.
You make that thing sound so easy. I mean, you're here. You are the first day you got lost. The second day you only found a couple points. You had to go back. What was it that kept you going?
I think some of it was initially just me trying to talk to other people, right? So I could put myself in their shoes. They want to quit. Now I'm like, I can't quit. But this was still like okay, because at this point, physically, I was, in my mind, it was painful. My feet hurt, my muscle, everything hurt, but it was still doable. So I was going to do it. So that wasn't, I didn't reach that point where it was like, I just cannot do anything. So after that stake, we go back. I remember the instructor coming up to me, he said, "Hey man, I'm glad you did well. You're gonna get selected." And that gave me that boost I needed. So we went through the team week, which was more of the same, right? Carrying, the ammo cans, water cans, dragging down pilots, pushing vehicles around. It's just all day physical effort, all day pretty much into the evening, into the night as well. So at the end of that, for my class, we had a 20-mile rock march. That would be the last event. This is it. Like if you make it through this and psychologically you meet the profile that they're looking for, you're gonna get paid. This is what you're gonna end up doing. So then I was excited about that. I made it all through. The most grueling point for me was doing that line phase, and I thought, in my mind, I could walk 20 miles. I've done it. It's fine. Like I used to do that on Fridays. Just leave work at 3, go walk 10 miles out, 10 miles back with a 90-pound rucksack. No big deal. But this is almost a month into this thing, right? So it's been grinding and grinding. You've just been pushing yourself and just, just slowly just beating yourself up. So I get to this 20-mile rock march, and I remember walking like my first, I have a mental pace in my head, how far, a mile is. So I'm about the second, third mile, and my back is just killing me. I could feel the spasms, super painful. It was basically like, like a knife, somebody stabbing you and just turning every time you walk. On my right side, it was just terrible. So I'm trying to push myself mentally because I've done this. I've told people, hey man, don't quit, just grind it out, just go through, just be tough. So I'm trying to be tough. And I remember like around the 4th or the 5th mile, I was just done. Like there was just like when mentally, and this is a new place for me because every time I've had something physical, I've been able to like just grind through it and go a little bit more. I mean, growing up as a kid, I remember doing track and field, waking up at 4. Nobody woke me up. I would just be like, oh, I need to do track and field. I wake up at 4, go running. I remember trying to hit the gym like at 13 and they wouldn't let me in there, So it wasn't something like I'd come to a physical point like this. This was new. So this was one of the things was like, there's no way I'm going anymore. I just can't take one more step. This pain is just incredible. So I remember just like sitting down, we called a rucksack full up. So I just basically, my rucksack was still behind. It weighed all of its 90 something pounds. I just sat down and just like rested myself on it. And I was just sitting there and I was watching people go. Because when I started off, I was in the fast group. Every time you do an event, you realize it's always going to be the super fast group. And there's a big middle, there's a fast gargle, but it's like in the middle. Then there's like a bigger one behind that one. And there's like a trail element. The guys who are not going to make it. So I just watched people walk by and I could see a small group of leaders who were winning, they were going, and I saw the next group show up, and I'm like, okay, that's a first middle group, that's where you want to be. And I saw them go by, and I saw the bigger middle group, and I was like, oh man. And I saw the trail group, and I was like, man, if I sit here anymore, I'm gonna fail. So in that moment, I was in a dark place where I was like, all right, here's what I need to do. I need to just get up, and I need something to happen to me. That's just more than me saying I can't take it anymore. Because if I try to explain to you, my one friend Isaiah was trying to explain to me that he was done and he was going back and his life was going to be better. I mean, it made no sense. It's like he quit. So I was like, I need something to happen to me that was visible. Like this guy had to quit because he was
stop you, right?
He was urinating blood. He had to quit. There's just no way. He didn't do it just to do it. I needed my leg to break or a spine to pop out. Like that's where I was. So I was like, okay, that's what I need to make happen. So I stood up. I couldn't walk still. So I was like, well, I tried to jog and the pain was almost bearable. I was like, okay, I do that. I was like, okay, if I run long enough, maybe something bad will happen then. I would just fail. They'll bring the ambulance. They'll put me in there. Like, oh, this dude, I'll go to the hospital. They'll run a couple of tests. But like, this dude is really damaged. It's amazing he even survived this. So that's what I was hoping for at this point. So I start jogging. And what I was expecting to happen, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just get hurt in the next 500 meters. No, I made it to the first mile. I met up with some of the guys that were in the trail. I passed them. One of my buddies that I started walking up with, Joe, he was up front. So I could see a few people up there, and I keep telling myself, I'm gonna meet up with him. I'm gonna meet up with Joe here shortly. So I just run up a little bit. I got to the bigger group, the second bigger group, and I'll jog till I can't go anymore. I'll breathe deeply, catch my breath, and just start running again because you got that rucksack just hitting you in the back every time you take a step. And still in my mind, something bad is gonna happen. I might just pass out, or die, or something, right? Like something I could just go back and tell people in my unit, like, hey, I just didn't fail because I wanted to come home and enjoy the AC. I failed because I literally almost died, and nothing happened. And I realized maybe another mile into it, I couldn't feel anything. There was no pain. I couldn't feel anything. I wasn't even like exhausted. I just couldn't feel anything. I was like, wow, well, I don't know what's happening, but I can't feel anything, so I'm just gonna keep going. And then I realized I'd caught up with that gargle, and I realized we were turning around. So I was in the fast middle group, the fast group. They're doing good. They're gonna definitely pass. I was in that group. I'm like, all right, cool, this is good. And then I see my buddy Joe, and I'm like, hey man, what's up, Joe? So like we're not supposed to talk, but you see your friend, you acknowledge them, and then it gives you a little bit of, you could do this. And at that point, I just could not feel anything. So I just kept going. We turned around. Towards the end, I could see we're coming back, to the schoolhouse. I could see like, okay, we're going back to the end. This is how it ends. So I started picking it up, and there was like just a couple of people ahead of me, and we're just all trying to sprint it in, to get the best time. It didn't matter at that point, but we brought it in. And it wasn't until much later in that day that I took stock. So all my life, I've had physical challenges, trying to sprint or run or win cross country events or something, but none of them had gotten me to the point where it was just physically impossible to continue. So that was where my mindset was actually formed. Then I realized, because I've always used, oh man, my heart's beating so fast, it's gonna rip out of my chest, and I would just stop. That was, up until that point, that was my gauge to when I'd done too much. Like physically it was gonna harm me, and then I'd never gone past that. So that was the first time where I'd actually gone past, this is gonna harm me physically, but I'm actually going past it, and I'm fine. Like my mind is okay. My body wasn't okay, obviously, but my mind is intact. Like it was good. It was like, yeah, it was the first time I understood that my mind was in my body. It's not one and the same. Like I've always thought it was one and the same. Like, no, it's not. So that's what I
You
got.
bring up a very powerful point, and I think that's why our mindset is so important, because you had gotten to the point where you're physically completely out of it, but your mind was what kept you going. And I think even applying it to a lot of the experiences we go through in life, it all starts with the mind. Favorite quote by James Allen: as a man thinketh, so is he, right, or she, to be politically correct. But the power of the mind. So as you were able to overcome or defeat this ordeal, or excel in this ordeal in your mind, what is that thought? Because you're kind of getting to that point where that kind of shifted or changed some things in your mind. What is that thought you now about doing something and seemingly impossible, right? How do you overcome that inertia or go over that hill, if you will, to keep going, right? How do you, how important is that? What lesson did that teach you personally when you apply it to your own life and how you win mental battles, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so yeah, it does. And to take that, so just to continue the story in a way and to answer your question, the first thing that happened was I came back, and and there were many things that happened throughout the course. There was no point where it was as challenging as that very moment. I mean, maybe emotionally or psychologically, I was challenged in different ways, different kinds of challenge, but nothing physically where to the point where I was like, oh, I have to give up. Every time I have a physical thing, I was like, well, my body doesn't want to cooperate, but I'm gonna just run it till it dies. And it never died. It just ticked on. But I also realized like there were a lot of people who seek that out. People who were influential. You hear the story of some wealthy dude or some guy, some lady climbing Everest K2, just going out there and climbing these peaks. And then, the question is, why would they do it? They have everything they need, But I realized that they were chasing that same goal. Like if you listen to, there's a guy that I listen to sometimes, David Goggins, who's a SEAL, and basically he challenged himself with that to go beyond what was normal. And then once he succeeded, he kept challenging himself. That's just what he did. He picked these goals because people who go through something like that, they walk away with a certain knowing about themselves. They understand that like they're not necessarily their body. So when they go through a hard time, they can power through. They just rely on the mind. So protecting that mind becomes very, very critical than the efforts that we put towards protecting our body. Because it's all about having that strong mindset, right? So if I lose that, it's worse than losing, like physical strength. If somebody goes through some accident that's life altering, if they have a strong mindset, they would find the best way to live their best lives in that moment. If they have a weak mind, then sometimes that's just it for them, right? So at the end of the day, we spend a lot of effort protecting our physical bodies, and we spend very little effort protecting our mind. And that ability to put yourself through adversity and come out the other end where you thought you were at your limit, it's a mark of transforming into leadership. But just like in general, if you look in the Bible, you have that Jesus going to the wilderness and starving himself for 40 days, some necessary feat. And even some of the temptations were that you could just make things into food, right? Like, why would you starve yourself for 40 days? You have the ability to do amazing stuff. But he understood that was that transformatory, like that was required, to separate the mind from the body. That's what was required. Elijah and people like that going through these long, removing themselves from people, spending long times in the wilderness. And the advantage of that is it allows you to be able to change your perspective at will, because you understand that you're not your body, to a lack of a better sense. But yeah.
Taking you back to this training, I mean, for you, there were quite a number of hurdles that you had to overcome, not just the physical part of finishing or completing this training. You're an immigrant from Ghana. And I'd imagine that the percentage of immigrants in the special forces would be slim to none. I'm not sure of the statistics. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was one hurdle. There was everything to stop you there, right? You could have looked at yourself and figured, looking at the demographics, right, and thought, this is not a place that you are, because there were not that many of you. So that was number one. And then number two, this whole selection process of making it. And number three, the actual test. How did you keep yourself motivated through all that process? Did you have to self-doubt? Did you think of, did you ever ask yourself or wonder what you were doing here, considering where you come from and looking at, the folks who, not that anyone is superior, but just looking at those social constructs, right, that I believe limits a lot of us. We look at who we are, what we have, where we come from, and then we talk ourselves out of a lot of things that we shouldn't. In your case, did you have to fight any of those mental battles, like questioning your ability and where you came from and what you're even doing here? Did that even cross your mind at any point in time?
Yeah, I mean, there was certain times where I wasn't as good as I needed to be, or there were certain times where I felt the tables were stacked against me. Like maybe I had to do a test, because you're getting graded and you're getting tested the whole time. And not only are you getting tested by some instructor who you have little interaction with, you're getting graded by your friends. So what happens is on Fridays, they bring out these pink slips and you just peer each other out. And if we decide we don't like you, you're gone. It's not like you were not performing. It's as simple as saying we don't like you and we don't think you'd be a good teammate. That's just how it is. So that brought its own stress. I mean, obviously, you're spending Monday through Friday playing Survivor. And if people like somebody, they may not be as competent as you, but potentially you could get sent home. And one of the things that people of color, and especially black people who go to, like, sometimes just they come back with that feeling that, oh man, I went through it and like I didn't make it because people didn't like me, or because of my race or something. There's some of that. I mean, I can't say there's none of that. There is some of that. Obviously, we're all people and we have our biases. It's inherent. But again, like, my earlier experiences held me. So what happened was I realized quickly that I had to change my mindset. I had to have a protective mindset of myself. I could not go in and socialize with everybody. Like, in terms of the things that they found amusing. If we were just hanging out and we were just talking, I don't watch a lot of cartoons. So, and the things, the shows that they could reference, they watch Simpsons, they watch American Dad. I don't watch those shows. And at the time, it was one of the things that I realized, if I was just going to go purely on things that I had in common with somebody, I was at a disadvantage. It was purely just based on like. I was starting off at a very disadvantageous position. So then what do I have to do with my mind to keep me from going into a depression, or to keep me from feeling as if the odds are stacked against me and I'm not going to be a good teammate? Because once my mind thinks that, I'm not going to be a good teammate, right? And the whole point is to be a good teammate.
Right.
So one of the things that I did was I realized, okay, I need to change my mindset. So my mindset was, you don't have to like me, but you have to need me. If you need something, you keep it around, right? So rather than like waste energy on the exterior, I'm going to invest that energy into myself, so I'm needed. So if you don't like me, you still need me.
Mm-hmm.
So what did they need? So the question was, you need me to carry all this weight, more than my fair share. You need me to push beyond, whatever it is. You need me to volunteer for all kinds of stuff that you're gonna need. You need me to be good at what I'm supposed to be doing, and then provide you with what you may need when you're not ready to provide it. So that pushed me to just focus on the things that I had in my control. Because I could be strong. I've already gone to the point where if I feel I'm not even gonna make it, I'm still gonna push, till it basically breaks me. So I never got to the point where it broke me. But then by doing that, just when I'd be like, oh, I've had enough, they'd be like, okay, we're good. We're gonna stop here, right? The instructors is gonna stop us. And so it's slowly but surely, um, teammates realize that, okay, well, maybe we don't like this guy. Maybe he has a funny accent. Maybe we can't relate to some of his stories, things that he finds funny. We don't find funny, but we need this guy because he's gonna work. He's gonna do what he's supposed to do and some, right? So that became my push, especially after going through the second phase and then my occupational skill phase. A lot of the things that I kept focusing on in the final phase, which is Robin Sage, I always focus on like doing more. I remember like my infill, we weighed our rucksacks. They were like 130 something pounds. Um, and one of the guys came up to me and he was like, dude, this is my seventh jump. I'm like, okay. I came from the 82nd. I've had, 30, 40 jumps at that point. And he's like, well, I need you to carry my, we had this saw. It's a big machine gun, right? It's quite an automatic weapon. It's like, I need you to carry it because I'm terrified to jump it. All right, you're gonna need me, so I'm gonna go do more than things that I'm good at, and I'll be better at it, right? So I was like, yeah, man, bring it over. And I was the first one off that plane. I remember the instructors had to basically carry my gear to get me on there. And when I left that plane, it basically did a dip. Like that's how heavy everything that I had on me was. I had the parachute, I had my medical kit on my 130 some pound rucksack, the saw. I was just heavy. I basically just fell head first and came out that way. But that mindset allows me to not dwell on things that are outside my control. Again, like if you understand you're not your body, then you're not dwelling on how you feel. Which how you feel is not necessarily a bad thing, but it over informs all of our actions. So you want to do how you feel as little as possible. And you want to have that ability to walk into a place, have control of yourself. And the way to have control of yourself is not to be yourself, but to be in that experience where your mind basically dwells on the brain, right? So your mind isn't your brain per se, it's what operates on that brain. So if you understand that about yourself, then you have that control of yourself, which is kind of what you want. You don't go in a place where you start feeling I'm hot, I'm cold, whatever. I'm in charge of all of this, and this is feeling that, not me. My body's feeling cold.
In your case, I mean, you had to work almost twice as much to make yourself valuable, and I think there's an important lesson there for a lot of us. Really, there is something you set your mind to that you want to accomplish, but we run into obstacles. Again, we think it's going to be a cakewalk. Maybe we try a couple times, and there's so many stories about persistence and all of that. But in your case, you had to work twice as much, or twice as hard rather, to create that value that your teammates or colleagues came to find in you. I think there's a really powerful lesson for us, really. I mean, I tell my kids about the importance of going the extra mile, right? Not fitting in with the average. And I think that's really where a lot of us give up, because we expect things to go a certain way. And so the moment we run into the slightest opposition, it becomes the reason, oh, I told you this was going to be hard, right? But we have to get to that point where we actually go beyond, find a reason, or a compelling reason to go over and above what we seem to be the obstacle. Now, you talk about, I think you made a point there about, getting depressed or something. And I don't want to minimize this, right? Because there are a lot of genuine and real instances of people who go into war, into military, and come back and have to deal with PTSD and all of that. How in your case? I mean, you've been through two wars, right? If not more, correct me if you've been to Afghanistan, you've been to Iraq, and maybe more. How do you keep your mind? Again, we're talking about mindset here. How do you guard against your mind? Um, where it just keeps you going, because not a lot of people go through your experiences. You've seen things, some of which you're not at liberty to share, and I respect that. But again, how do you keep sane? It's really no
Yeah,
better way to
yeah.
ask that question. How do you keep sane?
No, it's a really good question. I think one of the things that I have discovered that works for me is routine. And if you're trying to protect your mind, it's like the most efficient way to do it is to have something that you can immediately fall back on. There's a movie called Inception where these guys would go into people's dreams and try to influence some action they're going to take when they wake up, right? So they plant ideas in their dream and then it manifests itself in their waking world. And one of the things towards the end is that you could get lost in a dream state. So you couldn't come back to your own mind, right? Because we're going with their minds, if that was possible. And to me, that is kind of something that's very profound. You have to have a way to know, like to keep yourself grounded, like the real you. And the way to have that real you, sometimes when you lose your way, is to have some kind of routine that you fall into. So when people start getting to this state where their mind is not working at full capacity and full power, you need something to, it's the afferent and efferent system. So my mind can tell my body something to do to override whatever impulse. Like if it's a funny situation now, I can show and then be angry, right? And then my mind, even though I'm supposed to be laughing, my mind can override that. The opposite is true. If you tickle me, I may have a serious face, and then I might end up laughing. So one is going away from the mind, and then one is the mind taking impulse. If the mind loses its way in terms of how you structure and protect it, and that mindset that you form for yourself, then you need to have a way for the body to kickstart that, to remind it of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have routine, you will never be able to, it's not as easy, right? You might need other people's help. If you're going to rely on yourself, you need to have that routine in place. So that way, when your mind wanders off too far, you've just gone off, or something very deeply disturbing outside what your normalness is happening to you, then your body, by doing the routine, allows your mind to reform its mindset.
I
So
like that repetition piece there, 'cause I think there's a scripture um, in the Bible that not that I think I know that, because it says, "Do not be conformed to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind," which tells me that this renewing of the mind is not something you do once and stop, right? It's something you do
mm-hmm.
constantly, like over and over and over again. There's another one in Proverbs 4:23 which says, "Guard your heart," and that heart there refers to the mind as well. Like, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life. And that word diligence means something you do over and over again. So I think this really underscores the power or the importance of protecting the mind. Let's relate this back to what we're fighting right now globally. Again, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that this is an invisible war that we all are fighting. It's an invisible enemy. We don't see it. We know it's there. We don't see the virus. We don't see where it is to go track down or kill. It's there. I mean, you just don't know where you're going to catch it, which is why we're walking around with face masks and gloves, because it really could be anywhere, right? It's an invisible war. There's a story that I read a couple of days ago, actually, about a doctor who committed suicide in one of the New York hospitals. And again, we're not trying to speculate. I want to be very careful, but in the transcript or in the news article, she had talked to her dad and then had expressed how disengaged she had become because of all these people who have been dying before coming out of the truck, out of the emergency vehicles. And I guess she couldn't take it anymore and had to kill herself, which is a sad story. I mean, lots of respects out to all the people out there, first response team who are working. But again, I think it comes back to the constant effort that we have to put in to protect our mind. How do we even deal with something like this in this case, right? This is a virus that we're not seeing. How do we win this mental war? I mean, not that I expect you to be the expert or a
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
leader on
I'm definitely not an
how,
expert.
yeah, how do we win this battle against an invisible? You've been to war. What are some of the ways? I mean, sure, you go to war, you're looking for the enemy, you don't see him. How do you prepare yourself to win against this kind of battle?
Yeah, I think you use the word diligence, and I think you're a very intelligent human being. So you always say the smart things. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think one of the things that you pointed out, which I believe is key, is that diligently doing something. Because in the military, one of the things that we do is we practice that. Mastery of something is doing the basics well. That's a common thing that we say, right? So nobody who's in special operations is doing something just out there. They're just doing the simple things very, very well with very small error or no error at all, maybe small margin for error. So by doing that over and over again, that creates that routine for them. So whenever things go into chaos, you just fall back on that training. And it's not that you need that mindset, right? So if something were to happen and you're in an environment, you need that mindset to dominate the situation, right? Of course, my personal belief is that my mind can influence what is immediately around me.
Right.
Just like when we have mirror neurons. So psychologically, if somebody's smiling, you feel like you need to smile too. There's a social thing. We are social beings. We generally do that. So if I have a situation where I am lost, then this is where group therapy comes in, right? So routine is good, but when I get lost, other people doing the right thing can prompt me to do the right thing as well. So I feel like in a situation like this where we have this COVID virus running around, and one of the things that makes it even more challenging is that we're removing ourselves from what is our normal routine. So that routine itself is protected. That's when people lose their jobs. It's very significant for them. That normal routine is gone. If you develop a strong mindset, it is not a permanent event if you don't practice that strenuous activity, that activity that makes your mind stronger, right? If I went and run one marathon in my life, I would have benefited from that. But if I just keep running marathons or less than marathons, I won't grow that mindset, because I look at all life as programming. And somebody said it best. I can't remember his name. I'm not gonna quote it, but it's knowledge that's in the world, right? You have a kid, and there's hundreds of rules, if not thousands of rules in society. Nobody spends time to teach them every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they understand it all, right? Because psychologically, they're watching their parents, they're getting programmed. They're watching TV, they're getting programmed. So at the end of the day, we've done a lot of learning. If you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you've done a lot of learning. And the only method that we know to relearn something is to practice. We have to pair stimuli. So if we're using classical conditioning or operant conditioning, or we even learn into observation, we're watching somebody practicing something and learning that. But that's how you change pre-existing programs. So if I find myself to be somebody who worries a lot, then I need to reprogram that mind to not worry anymore. And I would only succeed if I practice it. If I practice not worrying, if I practice just letting go a little bit more every day, if I practice, if I wanna understand that the body doesn't control my mind, I need to do something that forces the body in a way to not control my mind. So let's say I understand that not everybody's going to go out there and run a marathon, 100 miles, or Ironman or whatever event that's out there, or climb Everest or K2. You don't have to. You have guys like Wim Hof who just hold your breath or endure extreme cold. If you put me in Alaska and you tell me to basically walk out there with no shirt, just in box or something, I'm going to be terrified, right? But if I do it and I don't die, I learn something about myself. So that's the whole point. Constant practice to change old programming. So I think that's one of the things that for me worked well. It's not like I'm immune to the stress of conflict or PTSD or anything like that. Something happens that is within an unusual event, the odds of you having that are high. But the way to get your mindset back is to go into some routine. And if you have a strong routine prior to the event happening, then you can easily fall back on that routine. So it's not too late if you find yourself stressed out about COVID and you're still at home and you're like, well, hey, things are not going the way I wanted. I can't go back to work. I'm stressed about my job, which is, I'm stressed about my house. Immediately, what happens is when I think about, oh man, I'm going to lose my job, or I've lost my job, I've been furloughed, how do I keep my lifestyle? So my immediate impulse is uncertainty, which is fear, right? Like, I am not sure what's going to happen to me. So I need to now secure my mind. And if I'm used to living with very little, or I understand that I'm living in luxury now, but I mean, I could go into the woods and go camping, I should be fine, I could hunt, then that gives me some kind of reassurance that I will be okay, right? And if I know that, then that keeps me from being stressed, because yeah, it doesn't matter, I'll be fine, I got this. Sometimes practice would have made you, if you went through this in 2007, 2008, hey, I know what to do.
Yeah.
But if you know you're having a hard time dealing with that, and you don't have the routine or the structure that you've built already, and you're just starting today as you're listening to us, then the best bet is to have friends who are based, or people around you in your circle who have that routine, and you can emulate that, right? So learn through observation in this crisis.
I love that you mentioned having a circle of friends or a support system, as I like to call it, because I think we're touching on a very important point, which would really come to bear as we deal with this, because we're nowhere near done. I mean, there are so many articles that are talking about the downstream impact of what's going to happen. Now, I think the focus is on the death toll and trying to flatten this curve, as it were, and so there's a lot less attention given to the depression, the mental degradation of a lot of people, like you rightly said, who are losing their jobs and being furloughed, and all the financial impact. And once we deal or we come with the virus, or we flatten this curve, now we're going to have a whole different problem on our hands with dealing with, the mental stability of a lot of people. How do we get through this financial crisis? And having that support system, that network of people, for me especially, I think is critical. I call it being careful who I let into my inner circle, because I think it's either one influences the other. I influence you, or you influence me. And so if I'm standing on a rock that's not too stable, I need to make sure that I reposition myself. And so being intentional about, the folks I surround myself with, who I'm listening to. It's not all the fear and doom and gloom. It's okay to follow what's happening on the news, but I think, again, coming back to creating some intentionality around this process. And it's hard enough dealing with a loss of a loved one. It's hard enough worrying about, whether or not you're going to lose your job. It's hard enough thinking about what you're going to do if you've already lost your job. But now you've got to also protect your mind. You've got to also be very careful who you let into your inner circle. Who are you listening to? And what are they feeding you, right? So this is, I believe, the second pandemic, if you will, that we're going to be fighting, because it's a double whammy. Not only you're fighting the disease itself, but you're also fighting, the mental pull, right, or the influence that's going to come as a result of this downfall. So
Yeah.
where do we go? I mean, for someone who's listening, who's, perhaps may know someone who's been impacted by, this disease, or maybe someone who's dead, unfortunately, that's one grief that they're dealing with. And then now they've got to deal with a job loss, right? Which is also a double impact on the mind. I mean, how much can a man take, right? I think that's where you get to that point that you have to do it, right? You can't give up, because then you just fall into a slump, you just become depressed, and that becomes something else. But you have to. I think that's really even more important than anything else. How do you, even more than ever before, right, become very intentional about protecting not only a physical mind, but that spirit or mental part of your body as well?
I think, yeah, I think that's critical, because it's very, to me, it seems very apparent that we're going to have some kind of downturn. The economy is suffering, and it's beginning to suffer. And normally these things take a few months. I think one of the things that I would do, like I do personally, so I would encourage more people to do, is to understand that things have always worked out for you. Like anybody here right now survived 9/11, survived the Great Recession, right? The last recession that we had, 2007, 2008. So if everybody here was listening to you has gone through some events in their life that they felt they weren't going to come back from, but you're still here. So the bottom line is that it always works out. So that should, if you believe that it always works out, then when things happen to you, you understand immediately that it always works out. So rather than taking that thing on yourself, you just stick with your routine. What do I do every day? I wake up, I make my bed, whatever my routine is, I read, I write, I talk to friends. This is where I would normally be working. Okay, nobody's employing me. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna find some work to do and fill in that time. What that's doing is keeping your routine. And when that routine is established, it's always gonna remind you that things are gonna work out. If you can remind yourself, or if you have people in your circle, like you said, who will remind you that things are gonna work out, then you're less likely to walk away feeling defeated. Because at the end of the day, you're like, okay, I'm gonna go back and give it a good effort tomorrow. And then you're always willing to try. So I would say like, if yes, there's going to be challenging times. If you can prepare for it, if you have been preparing for it, then this is a fantastic time for you. It's almost like the Joseph story, right? Like, he saw ahead of time that something was about to happen. I mean, what you described, Fred, is going to happen. It's almost like prophecy in a way, right? We're going to have challenging times. So the question is, what can I do now if I have 2 months or 3 months left?
Yep.
So can I then store grain? So that way when I need grain, I'm gonna have it. So now I'm empowering my mind I'm inoculating myself towards the future stress. So what can I do now? So if I start thinking about this now, and hopefully not in a panicked situation, then you're preparing yourself and you're gonna be better off than the average person when the time comes because you're prepared. As they say, chance favors a prepared mind.
I like that preparation part of it because I think that brings the practicality of the whole experience to light. I mean, you talked about the Joseph story, which I'm very familiar with, and how he had to store grain for the next 7 years. He could have easily chosen to believe or to buy into the narrative that this too shall pass. We're going to get through it. Absolutely, the famine will pass, but where is that going to find you? Where is that going to leave you? We're parlaying this thought, and I've said it too, we're going to get through this, we're in this together. Yes, we're going to get through it, but where is it going to leave us? The person who owns a business who believes that we're going to get through this or this pandemic shall pass, yes, is absolutely right. But it's going to pass, and then his business may not be able to recover. Or the person who believes we're going to get through this, or who has the virus and said, yes, they're going to get through it, but they're going to lose their jobs. They may not have any nest egg or anything to fall back on. So yes, we're going to get through this virus, absolutely. But the preparation part, I think it's important. There is that practicality. Yes, we pray, we hope, we believe, and all that. That's great. But we have to prepare, right? Store that grain as it will. Store that grain, prepare your mind, find that support system, whatever it takes to make sure that once this passes, that we're not subject to a whole slew of mental challenges that we have to deal with, or because it's finances and all. For some people, it may be already too late because they have already blown through everything they have. But for those of us who are still fortunate or blessed enough to still have the opportunity to prepare somehow, taking care of that mind, I think we've talked about it now, but also that preparation piece, right? Making sure that we have, and we're using grain here figuratively, but having that fallback plan, whatever that is, to make sure that once this is over, that it doesn't completely wipe you out. And that's a thing, that's what we're dwelling here, especially given what's happening to a lot of folks right now. How else do you prepare for something like this? Again, drawing back from your war experience, right? How else do you prepare for the worst in this case?
So I think like one thing I want to point out quickly is that like the way I do it, just to be simple about it, is that the first impact is you have to understand yourself. And the best way to understand yourself is to challenge yourself. So if you want to go on a fast, that's challenging yourself. Hold your breath for 5 minutes, climb Everest, do a mile. That is challenging yourself. The next thing is once you challenge yourself through practice, you can retain that strong mind. So once you understand that you're just not one and the same, that you control everything that happens to your body, it's all you. Your mind thinks it, thinks for you to be happy, your mind thinks for you to be stressed because something dangerous is about to happen, your body reacts accordingly. So now you get that, you have to go through practice. But then once I get practicing my routine down, that's not enough. I need people around me, like you pointed out. I need a circle of people who are also practicing the same thing, who are going to create this protective mechanism for me. So when I fail, they support me. When they fail, I support them. That gives me redundancy in my planning systems here, right? So if I can do some physical effort, do some effort of the mind. If it's going 2 weeks without talking to anybody, it sounds easy, but that's an impossible feat sometimes. That strengthens your mind, right? Whatever it is, you strengthen your mind. Then you practice. Then you create a routine to make sure that you don't lose that place. But if you do lose that place, you have people who are in your circle doing similar stuff that are gonna bring their routine to bear and influence you into a positive mindset. And then with all the stuff that is happening now, if you go with that mindset, you start preparing. Society doesn't break down when services and systems break down. It breaks down when people break down.
Yes.
And it's very easy for people to break down because for the most part, we haven't been practicing to be tight. Where people have humanity, society can never break down there, right? If you look in war-torn countries, you find an enclave of people sticking together, practicing what makes us human and working together. And that's what's important in every situation, even in crisis time. Because at the end of the day, we all have more room than we need.
Yes.
We all have more food than we actually need, and there's actually more toilet tissue than there actually meets the eye. There's no shortage.
Yeah,
there, right?
absolutely.
So if it come across as that way, but nothing, by us having people and people talking to us and us, everybody remaining calm, So it's like walking into a place and there's chaos or there's disarray, and it happens every now and then. I work now as an instructor, and I walk in and people are just running around doing stuff, running around like with their head cut off. They're looking for guidance. If I come in and I say, "Hey guys, here's what's happening, here's what we're gonna do," they do it, right? Same way, in our lives, people need leadership. Even people in leadership roles, as the saying goes, leaders need leaders, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
when you train your mind and you get to that point and you understand yourself very well, when the leader's lost, you can advise that leader. You can bring him into the circle. So if you're listening to this and you're a speaker, you're a leader somewhere, remember leaders need leaders too. And then that system continues to benefit all of us because it's a people endeavor. We're just the small units, and two of us coming together, we form a bond. That bond grows. We add more people. Somebody's going, wandering off the reservation. We bring them in. We have conversations with them, and we secure them. I've had friends who, after war, have killed themselves. And it's one of the things that they were missing was that circle. So when they went back wherever they came from, they couldn't find it. Like I talked to a friend on Facebook, maybe a week before he killed himself, and one of the things he told me was, "Man, I have no purpose." And that purpose comes from other people. What is our overall goal? That's a bigger wave of effort. And I was like, "Hey, man, let me give you purpose." But I didn't take it too seriously, maybe. But that's how these things go, right?
That's an important point, Kobe, that you bring up. And again, I share that the Bible is one of my go-to stories, but you may be familiar with the story about David and his men. And I did a teaching on this a couple of weeks ago, actually, when they come back to realize that their city, the town rather, Ziklag, had been raided by the Amalekites. They had burned down the city and taken their wives and kids captive. And this David, a commander-in-chief, and you can relate to this because you're in the military, and 600 men came back, and at that point, all they could do was cry. And you talk about men don't cry. They cried and cried and cried until the story says they didn't have any strength in them. There's one important thing that I stands out to me. It says David encouraged himself in the Lord. And this was because his men were seeking to kill him. This was their leader. They were blaming him, I guess, by virtue of him being the leader. They were seeking to stone him and kill him just because he was that leader. But the scripture that says he encouraged himself in the Lord. And I dwelt on the fact that it's important sometimes as we go through our own challenges that we learn to encourage ourselves in the Lord. You talk about the unfortunate incidents of your friend or friends who kill themselves for whatever reason. But it's important as you're watching this and as you're going through this to learn to encourage yourself. The person you may be leaning on right now may not be there for you. It's great to have support systems like we talked about, but you have to learn to encourage yourself. The fact that you've lost your job, the fact that you've been furloughed. Again, we're not minimizing this, right? You've lost a loved one through this. Perhaps you're dealing with the backlash of this yourself. It's important. We're not minimizing this, but what we're stressing is that you have to learn to protect your mindset. You have to learn to encourage yourself, whatever it takes. You need that. You need that to get through these challenging times. Again, we're going through this. No one has any answers. As much as we were speculating, we're seeing the curve flatten in certain cases. Some places are starting to open. That's a ray of hope. But we're in the long haul, and you have to, until we get the all clear, whatever the time is going to be, you have to learn to encourage yourself. You have to learn to protect that mindset. Whatever it takes, whether it's that support system, whether it's a book, whether it's a life coach, whatever it is, you have to learn to have. Don't kill yourself. Don't allow this thing to wipe you out because you have nowhere to go. And I think we're running up, coming up to the top of the hour here, but I think that's really a good place to kind of hone down or maybe drum it down or maybe emphasize this. And now there's someone watching here who is probably at the end of their rope and probably contemplating. If you're watching here, get help. Get help. Don't let this thing, no matter how challenging this thing is for you, and I'm calling it thing like it's this crisis, don't let this thing wipe you out. Encourage yourself. Find some support system. Don't commit suicide. There's resources out there, National Crisis Helpline. Get some type of help. Protect your mind. Don't die. Again, we're going to get through this, but there's that practicality. There's our effort. We have to put in that effort as well to make sure we protect our mind. Could be really quickly. I was listening to this NPR news on my drive to work one time, and this was even before, this was pre-COVID-19, and the guy was being interviewed and he had lost his job. And I remember the story so well. I actually put it in my upcoming book, Believe Dare Become, which should be coming out later on this year. But I asked the question, what defines you? And I asked that question because this guy's story shaped that question. He had lost his job and he was being interviewed, and these were his exact words, that he felt worthless. He felt worthless because he had lost his job. And for me, when I heard this, he had already written himself off. And I hope that he didn't go do anything crazy. But for him, his livelihood, everything was dependent upon the job. That was it for him. And I felt like reaching out through the radio to say, hey, dude, I understand you've lost your job, but this is not the end of it for you. Your job does not define you. COVID-19 does not define you. What defines you is that inner purpose. And you have to find that. No one's going to be able to give you that. You've got to find a way to encourage yourself, to draw that thing, whatever it is, out from you. It's important that you protect your mind, you keep sane through all of this, because once we're done with the scientific aspect, we get the vaccinations or whatever. Where is this thing gonna find you? Are you still gonna be standing sane and keeping that mental attitude right? Where is that going to find us? Could be really quickly here. What are your final thoughts? I know I kind of took that away a little because I'm really passionate about that. About really, finding that support and making sure that we get through this. So any closing thoughts, any final thoughts about maybe your reaction to that story or anything else that you want to share to underscore the point that we're making?
Yeah, I mean, I just to capture it so I don't go too long. First, understand your mind, understand who you are. To any feat that you find challenging, go to it fast. Two, understand that you have to practice the strong mindset. Three, get people around you. The best redundancy you can get after having people around you is to have some kind of belief system, like faith-based system, that is outside people, that never fails. So that's a human need, and it's protective in that way. So have that. And we're all not gonna have unique causes, right? I'm not gonna have a cause. Maybe you might have one. I might have to follow you. Find one that you feel strongly about and aligned to. We are herd animals in a way. We belong in groups. So what the herd is doing, some people are gonna find themselves either leading a pack of it, and some people are just gonna have to join the pack, or some people are gonna be against that pack. The story you raised, for example, they went out to do battle with somebody else, and they probably caused similar devastation to those same people that they
Yes.
experienced. But that's the human effort. Where we can focus on is our immediate circle, and we do the best we can to be part of that group and provide for one another. So if you find yourself right now thinking I can't help everybody, you're not supposed to help everybody. Just help the person right there next to you. It's protective in its own way. If you're helping, it means you're in a position to give help. So again, like that routine stuff. If I find myself worried about all kinds of stuff, what am I gonna do? Just go help somebody. As soon as you do that, your mind will immediately tell you, well, if you're able to help that guy carry groceries, if you're able to help that lady clean their house, if you're able to sweep that, well, then you're not helpless after all. You were helping them. So always give, right? And it will come back to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, right?
There's always blessings, man, that come in. And we can go on. You talked about helping people. I want to go back to that story again. And I know we're going to wrap this thing up, but you talk about helping people. And again, when David and his men, they went through this, he encouraged himself and he sought the Lord, and they went after the enemy. There was one significant thing that they did. They found a stranger who had been left by the enemies. This guy was sitting, he had been starved, he hadn't eaten, and they stopped to help him. They had no reason to. They had more important fish to fry, where they had their wives and children but they stopped to take care of this stranger. And then when they brought this guy to David, I imagine his old people were like, dude, we have more important things. Why are we stopping to help this stranger? But after they gave this guy some food and water, this guy actually led them directly to the enemy's camp. By helping someone in their own time of need, right? They were able to cut short or cut their journey short and let them straight. They went back and forth. But that's really the importance. I couldn't agree with you more about helping others, especially during these times. Yes, we have our own challenges. Yes, we have our own problems, but reaching out to help always comes back. Kobe, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate your service to our nation and all that you went through. This is a really inspiring story. If there's anything that we're being left with tonight, is to make sure that we're protecting our mind, our mindset, as we deal with this crisis or whatever crisis that anyone may be dealing with. I appreciate your insights there and your lessons. Great to have you on the show, and hopefully we get to have you again on this show and another subsequent edition of Time with It. Thank you to our audiences of viewers who watched the show tonight. We really appreciate you. Stay sane, protect that mind, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks again for watching, and have a good night.
Thanks, brother. Have a good one.
All right, you too.